You really thought you'd be part of this family. Victoria's voice cut through the air, her words dripping with disdain as she blocked Nova from stepping onto the yacht. Go back to where you belong. The cold sting of exclusion hit Nova like a punch to the gut, but instead of shrinking, she stood taller. What they didn't realize, Nova Ellis was no longer asking for permission. The spotlight was finally on her, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. As the yacht remained docked, Nova watched from the shore, confusion creeping through the air. The crew was scrambling. Something wasn't right. The ship wasn't leaving the harbor. Why? Because the owner hadn't arrived. This is just the beginning of her journey. A story of defiance, strength, and a fight for what's rightfully hers. Curious to see how she takes back control. Stay tuned and don't the coffee. Forget to hit that subscribe button. Share where you're listening from and the time. You won't want to miss what happens next. The coffee dripped into the pot with a rhythm that matched Nova Ellis's heartbeat. Steady, deliberate, unwavering. She stood in her sleek kitchen, the morning light slicing through the blinds to dance across the quartz countertops. Her fingers traced the handle of a chipped ceramic mug, a relic from her first apartment, back when she was just a black girl from a nowhere neighborhood, clawing her way up in a tech world that didn't expect her to succeed. Now she was a name in boardrooms, a force behind algorithms that powered startups into empires. Yet, in this house, in this marriage, she was still proving herself. Nova's eyes flicked to the empty chair across the kitchen island. Marcus had left early, as always, for some meeting with clients who'd never know. His wife had rewritten the code that made their deals possible. His aftershave lingered sharp and fleeting, like his promises to stand up to his family. The Prestons' old money, old rules, old prejudices had never warmed to her. She'd felt it in the belt silences at their dinners, the tight smiles of Marcus's sister, Victoria, and the way his mother, Evelyn, spoke of tradition like it was a wall Nova could never climb. She poured her coffee, the steam curling like a question mark. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it out of habit. A notification from the Preston family group chat. Voyager's Legacy Annual Yacht Trip. Her heart lifted. A foolish flutter of hope. The yacht trip was their sacred ritual. A week of champagne toasts and curated memories on the open water. Nova had been invited once 3 years ago and spent the entire time feeling like an exhibit, smiled at but never seen. This time, she'd make it different. She'd show them she belonged. Opening the chat. Opening the chat, scrolled through the flurry of messages. Evelyn's itinerary. Victoria's gushing about the chef. A cousin's emoji-laden excitement. No mention of her. Nova's thumb hovered over the screen. Her pulse quickening. She wasn't naive. She'd caught the sidelong glances, the way conversations hushed when she entered rooms. But this was her family now, wasn't it? Marcus's ring on her finger, their shared bed, their shared life. It had to mean something. She set the phone down and crossed to the living room, where a framed photo of their wedding sat on the mantel. Marcus's grin was wide, but his family stood stiffly behind them. Victoria's smile as sharp as a blade. Nova had laughed it off, then told herself it was just nerves. But the memory of last month's brunch stung sharper. Victoria's casual remark about cultural fit when Nova suggested hosting a family event. Evelyn had nodded, her lips pursed, and Marcus had changed the subject again. Nova returned to the kitchen, her coffee cooling. She opened her laptop, pulling up The yacht trip's shared calendar. Her name was there, wasn't it? She'd RSVP'd weeks ago, hadn't she? The screen loaded and her breath caught. The guest list stared back, pristine and deliberate. Aine, Victoria, her husband Tom, cousins, fiancés, friends. No, Nova Alice. Her Nova Alice. Fingers froze on the trackpad. The silence of the house pressing against her ribs. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. She closed the laptop, her jaw tight. The old Nova would have called Marcus, demanded answers. Let her hurt, spill over. But the woman she'd become, the one who'd built a tech empire from nothing, who'd faced boardrooms full of skeptics, and one knew better. She'd go to that dock. She'd show up. They couldn't erase her if she were standing right in front of them. Upstairs, she pulled a suitcase from the closet. Do her movements precise. She chose a navy dress, tailored but unassuming, and a pair of flats that wouldn't falter on a dock. In a woven basket, she packed gifts, a leather-bound journal for Evelyn, artisanal chocolates for the cousins, a silk scarf for Victoria, small gestures, bridges. She'd been building for years, even if they kept burning them down. She zipped the suitcase, her reflection catching in the mirror. A tall black woman with eyes that held both fire and fatigue. She wasn't here to beg. She was here to claim. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Lena, her best friend since college, the only one who'd ever called the Prestons out for what they were. You sure about this yacht thing? Those people don't deserve you. Nova's lips curved into a half smile. Lena had always seen through the gloss of Marcus's family. Her warnings sharp with the wisdom of someone who'd navigated the same slits. I'm going. Nova typed back. I'll make them see me. Nova typed back, carried the suitcase downstairs. The basket tucked under her arm. The kitchen clock ticked. Each second a reminder of the distance between her and the family she'd married into. She thought of Victoria's voice at that brunch. Smooth as venom. We just want to keep things cohesive. Cohesive. A word that cut deeper than any insult because it didn't have to name her race to make its point. Nova locked the front door behind her. The suitcase wheels humming against the hardwood. She'd spent years proving she was enough. Enough for the tech world. Enough for Marcus. Enough for herself. But the Prestons, they'd drawn a line, and she'd crossed it by existing. As she loaded her car, the morning sun glinted off the windshield, sharp and unyielding. She wasn't just going to the yacht, she was going to war. The drive to the marina loomed ahead, a path she'd walk alone. But Nova Alice had walked harder roads before. She'd built a life from nothing, turned skeptics into believers, and bought a yacht they didn't even know was hers. Let them smile, their tight smiles. Let them whisper their coded words. She'd stand. The highway stretched before on that dock, and they'd learn what it meant to underestimate her. The highway stretched before Nova Alice, like a ribbon of defiance, each mile a step closer to the confrontation she hadn't named, but could feel in her bones. The radio played low, a jazz track weaving through the hum of her SUV's engine, its notes as restless as her thoughts. Her suitcase and woven basket of gifts sat in the back seat, silent passengers on a journey that felt less like a family trip and more like a reckoning. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the dashboard, but Nova's focus was inward, her mind tracing the fault lines of her place in the Preston family. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, her wedding band catching the light. Marcus had promised her a life together, but his silence in the face of his family's slights had carved a hollow space between them. She thought of the last family dinner, Victoria's voice slicing through the chatter. Some people just don't get our traditions. The table had gone quiet, eyes darting to Nova, then away. Marcus had squeezed her hand under the table, but said nothing. Always nothing. Her jaw tightened at the memory, the familiar sting of being seen, but not acknowledged. Her phone, but Nova's focus was inward, buzzed in the center console, pulling her from the past. She tapped the screen, Lena's voice crackling through the car's speakers. Nova, you sure about this yacht thing? Lena's tone was sharp, protective, the kind of friend who'd seen Nova through late-night coding marathons and boardroom battles. Those Prestonans played dirty. You don't need their approval to shine. Nova's lips curved, a flicker of warmth in the chill of her resolve. I know, Lena, but I'm tired of being invisible. I'm showing to up, Leah Nasaihed, the sound, heavy with unspoken warnings. Just watch your back. They don't like being outdone, especially not by you. The call ended, but Lena's words lingered, a reminder of the world. Nova navigated one where her blackness was both her strength and the target on her back. She pulled into a small coastal market, the kind with weathered signs and baskets of fresh produce. Stepping out, she inhaled salt-tinged air, grounding herself. Inside, she picked out a box of artisanal chocolates and a bouquet of white lies, their petals soft but unyielding like her. These were her peace offerings, her attempt to bridge the chasm between her and the Prestons. But as she paid, the cashier's warm smile contrasted with the cold memory of Evelyn's voice. We prefer to keep things in the family, as if Nova with Marcus's ring and years of loyalty wasn't family. Back in the car, she tucked the gifts into the basket. Then her fingers brushing the silk scarf she'd chosen for Victoria. It was a foolish hope, perhaps, that a gesture could soften someone who'd made exclusion an art form. Nova's mind drifted to the yacht, a secret triumph she'd bought to it through a shell company, a quiet flex of the wealth she'd earned in a world that doubted her at every turn. The Prestons didn't know. Marcus didn't know. It was her ace, her armor. There, as truth, the road curved toward the marina, the ocean glinting in the distance, like a promise. Nova's thoughts turned to her early days with Marcus, when his charm had felt like a shield against the world. But shields could crack. She remembered a family brunch months ago where Victoria had forgotten to include her in the seating plan. Nova had stood at the edge of the room holding a mimosa she didn't drink, while her phone pinged again. Marcus laughed with his cousins, oblivious. It's just how they are, he'd said later, as if that excused the sting. Her phone pinged again. A photo from the Preston group chat. Victoria, posing on the yacht's deck, her blonde hair catching the sun, captioned, "Ready for our legacy voyage." Nova's chest tightened. No mention of her. No trace of her name. She set the phone down, her hand steady, but her pulse racing. They thought they could erase her, write her out of their story. But stories could be rewritten, and Nova was holding the pen. The marina came into view, yachts bobbing against the horizon like white sentinels. She parked, the gravel crunching under her tires, and stepped out, the sea breeze tugging at her dress. The suitcase wheels clicked as she pulled it from the trunk. The basket, balanced carefully. In her other hand, She caught her reflection in the car window. A black woman standing tall, her eyes sharp with purpose. This wasn't just about a trip. It was about claiming her place in a world that kept trying to push her out. She started toward the dock, the ramp, leading to the yacht gleaming under the midday sun. Laughter floated down from the deck. Victoria's voice, Evelyn's clipped tones, the cousins' carefree chatter. Nova's heart thudded, not with fear, but with clarity. She'd spent years proving herself in boardrooms, in code, in a life she'd built from the ground up. The Prestons could close their doors, but they couldn't stop her from walking through. As she approached the ramp, a crew member glanced her way, his smile professional but curious. Nova nodded, her flat, silent on the wood. She could see Marcus now, standing near the railing, his back to her. For a moment, she let herself hope he'd turn, see her, choose her. But hope was a fragile thing to sting, and Nova Ellis was done with fragility. She gripped the basket tighter, her gifts a Yacht de defiance, and she gripped the basket tighter, stepped forward, ready to face whatever waited at the top. The hum of the yacht's engine vibrated in Nova's chest, a low, persistent sound that mirrored the tightening in her chest. She had expected her heart to race as she approached, but instead there was a cold calm in her. Every step on the wooden dockfat heavier, laden with the weight of years of exclusions and silent betrayals. Her gaze flickered to the deck where the Prestons, with their pretense of perfect happiness, stood in their usual places. Marcus was in the midst of a conversation, laughing with his cousins, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. The crew member eyed her as she approached the ramp, his polite smile faltering slightly. Nova straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked forward with purpose. She didn't falter, not even when her feet hit the first plank of the ramp, the sound of the wood creaking underfoot like a warning. She refused to let that warning rattle her. Victoria spotted her first, standing at the railing, her blonde hair rippling in the salty breeze. For a moment, their eyes locked. Two women caught in an unspoken struggle, one of dominance, control, and Nova knew what Victoria was thinking. Belonging. Nova knew what Victoria was thinking. She could see it in the tightening of her jaw, the flash of irritation, before it was masked by her ever-present smile. It wasn't the smile of a sister-in-law. It was the smile of someone who saw you as a threat to their kingdom, and they would do whatever it took to knock you down. Nova, Victoria, called out, her voice as smooth and sharp as a blade. How lovely to see you, but I'm afraid the guest list is full. We thought you'd have other plans. The words slid off Victoria's tongue like honey, sweet, but deadly. Nova's heart clenched, but she didn't flinch. She kept walking, her steps measured, her eyes unwavering. There was no longer any room for fear. Not now, not here. I'm sure there's some mistake, Nova said, her voice cool and controlled. I've RSVP'd, and I fully intend to join the trip. The yacht seemed to still around her, as though the very air held its breath. Nova had hoped for a confrontation, but the reality was sharper. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but the words she spoke next were laced with venom, disguised in politeness. The list is set. The space is limited. I think it's best if you reconsider. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Victoria gestured to the group gathered behind her, a mix of cousins and friends who were now watching with rapt attention. Nova's lips pressed into a thin line as she stepped forward, unfazed by the cold reception. She knew what they were trying to do. They were trying to make her feel small, invisible, out of place. And for a moment, she thought of the years of smiling through the pain, of being too much in a world that wanted her to be less. But that was over now. She set the basket of gifts on the deck, the familiar weight of her resolve settling. Nova didn't wait for the reaction. Deep in her bones, "I think it's time you learned who the real owner of this yacht is," she said, her words carrying across the tension-filled air. Victoria blinked, her eyebrows drawing together in confusion. Nova didn't wait for the reaction. She pulled out the sleek set of keys from her bag, letting them glint under the harsh sunlight. The crowd murmured, sensing something different, something bigger. Nova's gaze remained fixed on Victoria as she casually dropped the keys into the crew members' waiting hands. "This yacht," Nova said, her voice now full of authority, "is mine. I bought it through my own company. You know, in the one I built from nothing while you were busy dismissing me as unfit." There was a moment of silence. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her face momentarily losing its practiced mask of... There was a moment of silence, civility, but the storm Nova had anticipated wasn't in the words, it was in the silence that followed, where everyone on board took in the weight of the statement. They had expected her to play the role of the subservient wife, to fall in line, but Nova wasn't that woman anymore. Victoria opened her mouth to say something, but Nova didn't give her the chance. "Save it," Nova interrupted, her tone firm. "I'm not here to beg for acceptance. I'm here to claim what's mine." She felt the weight of their stares, heard the subtle gas, but she didn't let them shake her. The room, once charged with silent judgment, now simmered with uncertainty. Marcus appeared at the top of the steps, his face registering disbelief, his posture stiff. "Nova." His voice broke through the tension, a hint of confusion lacing his words. "What's going on?" She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his. She had never felt more distant from him than she did in that moment. The man who had sworn to protect her, to support her, stood there, silent. His gaze flickered from her, to the group, to his family, and then to the empty space between them. "I don't think you can fix this, Marcus," Nova said, her voice carrying the weight of years of frustration. "You've never stood by me when it counted. I've built my empire on my own. This is just the beginning." The yacht was silent. The only sound, the yacht was silent. Faint hum of the engine in the background. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed, but no words came. Nova gave him one last look, then turned her back on him. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. Her voice rang out as she faced the stunned group on the deck. "I'm taking control of my life," she said, her tone unwavering. "I'm not here to be your token. I'm not here to be your apology. I'm here to own my space. And if you're not with me, then you'll get out of my way." Victoria's face pad as the words hit their mark. But it was Evelyn who spoke next, her voice thin with barely contained rage. "You'll to regret this, Nova." She spat, her eyes flashing with venom. "You think you've won. You haven't." Nova didn't flinch. "I've already won. Evelyn, I've always been winning. Now, it's your turn to watch me claim my victory." With that, she turned and walked off the yacht, her stride full of confidence. She didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. They would have to learn the hard way. Nova Ellis was no longer invisible. The sound of Nova's footsteps echoed off the wooden planks. As she walked down the ramp, the finality of her decision settling heavily in her chest. Behind her, the murmur of voices grew louder, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need to hear what they were saying. She already knew. She was the villain in their story. The black woman who had dared to challenge their perfect insular world. Her mind replayed Marcus's silent figure on the deck, his face caught between guilt and confusion. She already knew. I couldn't waste another second on him. He'd had years to stand by her, to fight for her, to be the man she had once hoped he would be. But he hadn't. And now, as the yacht loomed behind her, like a symbol of all her wasted time, she understood something crucial. She had been fighting a battle that wasn't hers to fight anymore. She didn't need their approval. She was free now. The marina was quieter than she remembered. The air was thick with the scent of salt water, but it didn't calm her. If anything, it only seemed to highlight the weight of the choice she had made. As Nova loaded her things into her car, she realized she wasn't angry. She was beyond anger. This was something deeper, something more visceral. The feeling of reclaiming herself piece by piece. Her phone buzzed once more. She didn't need to look at it to know who it was. Marcus. The message, short and pleading, only confirmed what she already knew. Can we talk? Talk. Can we talk? Had talked for years. Talked about dreams, about future plans, about the family they would build together. But every time she tried to have a real conversation, he shut her out, hid behind his privilege, and let his family's racism become the elephant in the room that no one dared to confront. No, Nova thought. This time, the silence wasn't on her. She deleted the message without a second thought. The drive back home was a blur of thoughts and emotions that had no place to go. She didn't even bother turning on the radio. It wasn't necessary. The soundtrack of her life was always louder than anything that could come from speakers. Each turn, each street felt like the final step in a journey she'd been on for far too long. One that had started when she was just a girl, unsure of herself, unsure of her worth. Now, all those years of feeling small, of doubting her place in the realities settled in, the world seemed so distant. She had fought her way into a position of power in a space that never wanted her there. She had proven her worth in rooms that were stacked against her, and now she would prove it again. Nova arrived home to the quiet of her empty house. The lights were off, but the familiar warmth of the space welcomed her. She dropped her bags by the door and sank onto the couch, allowing herself a moment to breathe. She stared at the photo on the mantle, the one of her and Marcus on their wedding day. Her fingers traced the frame, but there was no tenderness in the gesture, only a sharp, bitter truth. It was over. The reality settled in the life she had tried to build with him, the one where she had kept her head down, smiled through the insults, and tolerated his family's indifference, was gone. But that wasn't the end of her story. This was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Lena. "You okay?" Nova stared at the message. The simplicity of it, both comforting and painful. Lena had been her constant through every trial, every late night coding session, every battle she'd fought against a world that didn't want her to succeed. Lena had seen the pain beneath the polished exterior, the exhaustion Nova had worn like a second skin. "I'm better than I've ever been." Nova typed back, "It's time for me to do things my way. I'm done with their version of who I'm supposed to be." Lena responded almost immediately, "You've got this, Nova. They won't know what hit them." A soft smile tugged at Nova's lips. It was a reminder that no matter how big the world was, there were people who had always seen her, who had always believed in her, even when she had forgotten to believe in herself. With a deep breath, Nova stood and walked toward her office, a space she had designed to be entirely hers. It was lined with books, gadgets, and reminders of all she had accomplished. She had built this space, just as she had built her career, on her terms, not anyone else's. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The screen flickered to life, but it wasn't the numbers or the algorithms that caught her attention. This time, it was the idea that had been brewing in her mind for months, the one that would take her from being a woman, defined by others, to a woman who defined herself, a foundation, not just for tech, startups, but for women like her, Black women, underrepresented and overlooked. She would use her influence, her wealth, and her knowledge to make sure they had the opportunities that she had fought for every single day. And this foundation would be built on more than just business. It would be built on power, the kind of power that came from knowing who you were, from walking through the world with confidence and courage. She opened a new document and typed the first words of what would be her next chapter. The future is mine. To create. The click of the keyboard was the only sound in the room, but it was enough. For the first time in a long, she was building her own, while Nova Ellis felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The rest of the world could try to ignore her, dismiss her, or erase her, but Nova wasn't asking for a seat at their table anymore. She was building her own, and it would be big enough for every woman who had ever been told she didn't belong. The days following the Yacht incident felt like a storm had passed through Nova's life, clearing away the debris of her past, the wreckage of her marriage, the burned bridges with Marcus's family, and the new unfamiliar sense of independence. Each piece of her, the world had been upended, but it felt right. It felt necessary. The foundation was taking shape faster than she had imagined. Word of her sudden, bold actions had spread like wildfire through the circle she had once tried so hard to break into. Now they were reaching out to her, eager to be a part of her world, to join the movement she was quietly building from the ground up. Women from all walks of life, from aspiring tech, from the ground up, entrepreneurs to creatives and activists, were sending emails, messages, and support, asking how they could contribute, how they could help her realize her vision. But Nova didn't have time to focus on the gratitude. She had a world to change. And it started with the people who mattered most, those who had always believed in her, and those who would never stand in her way again. It was late in the evening when Lena stopped by as she had promised. Nova had been working in her office, the faint light of her desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls, when the familiar knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Lena said with a grin, stepping inside and taking off her coat. "How's the queen building her empire?" Nova stood up from her desk, pushing her chair back with a soft squeak. "I'm not building it alone anymore," she replied, her voice steady, but the exhaustion in her eyes was undeniable. "And I'm not just doing this for me anymore. I'm doing this for every woman who's had to. I'm not building it alone anymore." Fight just to be seen. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I think that yacht trip lit a fire in you. I can feel it from here." Nova smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the stack of papers on her desk, all outlining plans for the foundation, scholarships, mentorship programs, a startup incubator, specifically designed for Black women in tech. She had spent hours researching Gearzer, refining, and conceptualizing, but even that didn't feel like enough. "I'm going to need more than just money to make this happen." Lena Nova said, pacing across the room. I need people who understand what it's like to be dismissed, to be erased. The only way to make sure we have a real impact is if we change the way people think. We need to show them that women like us aren't just good enough. We're essential. Lena nodded, her expression serious. So, what's next? Nova's eyes met hers. And so what's next? For the first time in weeks, the weight of her decision felt lighter. Next, I show the world who I really am, she said, and that means going public, making this foundation something real, not just a website or a press release, but a movement. Lena watched her for a long moment, as though trying to read between the lines of Nova's words. Are you ready for that kind of spotlight? Nova paused. It wasn't the first time Lena had asked her that question, but this time it felt different. She had fought to be seen, to be heard. She had spent so many years worrying that if she didn't prove herself, no one would. But now she understood that this wasn't about proving anything. This was about claiming her place in a world that had never truly given her one. I've always been ready, Nova said, her voice steady, but I wasn't ready to do it alone. Lena stepped forward, placing a hand on Nova's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Nova smiled, feeling the weight of that truth settle in her bones. The foundation was more than just. It was a night of celebration, an idea. It was a promise to herself and to every woman who had ever been made to feel invisible, but it was also a challenge that would demand everything from her time, her energy, her heart, and in the weeks that followed, the groundwork began to take shape faster than she had anticipated. The first official event was a fundraiser, an opportunity for her to introduce the foundation to the world. The response was overwhelming, with the room filled with supporters, allies, and potential donors who understood the importance of her vision. It was a night of celebration, but also a night of reckoning. For Nova, it felt like the culmination of everything she had fought for, everything she had endured. But there was something else, too, as she stood in front of the crowd, the light of the chandelier casting a soft glow over her. She realized that this wasn't just about the foundation. This was about her, reclaiming everything she had given up. Her dignity, her power, she had given up voice. She wasn't just standing in front of them as a woman trying to make a difference. She was standing as Nova Ellis, a woman who had refused to be silenced. But just as she had anticipated, there was a ripple in the room. Marcus had shown up. He was standing near the back, watching her with a look that she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. It was something else. Something unfamiliar but heavy. He had always been her anchor, but now he felt like a ghost from her past. A ghost she didn't need. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief second, time seemed to stop. She felt the weight of their history, the promises broken, and the paths they had each taken. She could see it in his eyes. He had come to apologize, but Nova didn't need his apology. She didn't need anything from him. With a final glance, she turned back to the crowd, her focus, with a final glance, shifting entirely to the future she was building. The moment had passed, and she had no intention of looking back. This was her time now, and she would fight for it. As the night carried on, Nova spoke with passion about the future she envisioned for women in tech, her words flowing with a certainty that had once been foreign to her. She had shed the layers of doubt, of fear, and of guilt. She was no longer the woman who sought approval from a family that never understood her. She was no longer the woman who had to fight for every seat at the table. She was the woman who was building her own table. And this time, no one would be able to take it away from her. The night after the fundraiser, Nova stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, her reflection staring back at her like a woman she hadn't fully met before. There were lines in her face now, not from age, but from the weight of decisions that had pushed her to her limits. But tonight, she didn't see the exhausted woman Nova's phone buzzed, had been for so long. Instead, she saw someone different. Someone who had finally learned the cost of real freedom. The foundation was growing faster than she had imagined. Donations were pouring in. Women were applying for grants. And the media had begun to take notice. Every day, the world seemed to take another step toward catching up with her. But the price of all this, the time, the energy, the pieces of herself she was giving away to this cause was starting to show. She hadn't been home much. Marcus had been quiet, sending text messages that went unanswered. Lena had warned her about being so consumed by the work, but Nova couldn't afford to let up now. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Lena. "You're still breathing." Nova couldn't help but smile at Lena's bluntness. She quickly typed a response, just barely, getting too used to the grind. "I think I get it, but you gotta take care of you, too. Can we grab dinner soon?" Nova hesitated, glancing at the stack of papers on her desk, the calendar filled with upcoming meetings and speaking engagements. But she knew what Lena was saying. She couldn't keep pushing herself without remembering who she was outside of the work. "Yeah, dinner. Sounds good. I need a break." As she hit send, there was a knock on the door. Nova wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she froze. It was Marcus, standing on her doorstep, looking as out of place as he always had in her world. His hands were stuffed in the pockets of his coat, his eyes tired, a small crease of regret on his forehead. He had that look, the one that had always meant he was about to say something that would leave her questioning everything. "Nova," he said, his voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" The sound of his name on his lips struck a chord deep inside her. There had been so much water under the bridge, so many things unsaid between "can we talk" them, but after everything, she wasn't sure if she was ready for another round of the same old conversation. "What's there to talk about, Marcus?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "You made your choice." His face tightened. "I know, but he broke off, stepping forward into the doorway. "I need to explain. I've been thinking. Maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things." Nova crossed her arms, her posture a silent challenge. "Maybe. Or maybe you just... I think you're losing me." His eyes flashed, but the anger was tempered by something softer, more vulnerable. "I never wanted to lose you, Nova, but I didn't know how to help you. And then I just stayed silent. I let them do what they did, and I let you fight alone." "You didn't let me fight, Marcus." Nova shot back, her voice laced with bitterness. "You chose to be silent. You chose to protect them over me. You chose your family's comfort over mine." Marcus seemed to recoil at the words, his jaw tightening. "I never meant for it to be." Nova shot back. "That way," he said softly. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make it better without causing a scene, but now I see that wasn't enough. I wasn't enough." "Exactly," Nova said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, not with the anger she'd felt before, but with a weariness that cut deeper than anything else You never were. And neither was your family. The silence between them stretched thick and heavy. For the first time, Marcus didn't try to defend himself. He just stood there, his eyes on the floor, looking lost. Why? Now, Nova asked, after a long pause, why are you here after everything? He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Because I'm watching you build something that's bigger than both of us. I see how you're changing, how you're growing, and I don't want to be. Nova stared at him, the one left behind. I'm trying to understand how I can fit into this, into your life now. Nova stared at him for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking into her. But the truth was, no. Matter how badly she had wanted him to be the one to stand by her, he never had been. And as much as part of her HD at the thought of losing him for good, another part, the stronger part, knew that she had already been standing on her own. She had done the work. She had fought. She had risen. Not because of him, but in spite of him. I can't keep waiting for you. Marcus, Nova said, her voice low, steady. I've spent too long doing that, waiting for you to stand up for me, for us. And it's clear now that you won't. Marcus's face twisted with guilt, but Nova wasn't about to let him take any more from her. I'm not angry anymore, she continued, her tone cold but not unkind. I'm just done. I'm done with the waiting, the pretending, and the hoping. His shoulders slumped as he nodded, finally understanding that there was no going back. Goodbye, Marcus, Nova said, her voice carrying the finality of a door closing. It wasn't out of spite. It wasn't out of anger. It was just the reality of what they had become. She didn't wait for him to say another word. She turned and closed the door softly behind her as the click of the latch echoed in the silence of her home. Nova finally felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't going to keep holding on to something that had already slipped away. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Lena. Dinner tonight. Nova stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, yes, I think I'm ready to live again. She stood there for a moment, the weight of her past lifting with each passing second. It was time to move forward. The world was waiting, and so was she. The days blurred together in a flurry of meetings, phone calls, and endless. The world was waiting. Emails. But Nova didn't mind. It was a rhythm she had come to crave. The controlled chaos of building something that could outlast her. Each task, no matter how small, brought her closer to the dream she had once only whispered to herself. The foundation was gaining momentum. Women were showing up in droves, ready to claim the opportunities they had been denied for too long. But even in the whirlwind of success, Nova couldn't escape the lingering feeling of the past. The shadow of Marcus's words, the quiet hum of his absence seemed to follow her through the days. She had told herself she was done with him, and yet his departure still left a gap. One she hadn't expected, not because she wanted him back, but because his absence signified a chapter of her life that, no matter how painful, had shaped her. The foundation's first public event was coming up. It would be a night of celebration, a formal gala to raise funds for the scholarships, for the startups, for the dreams of women who had never been given the chance to show what they could do. It was everything she had worked for, and it would be her chance to make sure the world knew she wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, but the weight of the event was almost suffocating. She had been to enough galas, enough fundraisers, to know that they were rarely what they seemed beneath the smiles and the champagne flutes There were always agendas, always politics. Nova knew better than to expect this night to be different. The faces would be familiar, the questions rehearsed, the judgments waiting just beneath polite smiles. But she had changed. She had learned how to move through spaces that once tried to contain her. Tonight, she wasn't coming to prove her worth. She was stepping in to claim her place. Standing before the mirror, she slid a diamond earring into her ear. For a moment, she held her own gaze. The reflection staring back wasn't the woman who once second-guessed every move, who bent under doubt and loneliness. This was a woman who had faced every demon, fought through silence, endured, being underestimated and chosen to rise anyway. Her gown was midnight blue, understated, yet commanding. The neckline traced her shoulders with elegance, the collar sharpening the line of her jaw. Her hair, pulled back into a sleek ponytail, didn't shift an inch in the wind, drifting through the open window. It was all deliberate. She looked like control itself. Her phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. Lena, tonight's the night. Who? You ready to set the world on fire? Nova's lips curved into a smile. Her reply was quick, steady. Ready? Let's make this count. She slipped into her heels. The weight pressing on her chest wasn't fear, it was anticipation. She thought of the nights she had worked alone, exhausted, her vision fragile in the dark. She thought of the loneliness that came with refusing to shrink into someone else's mold. Tonight was the moment all of it converged. She wasn't just walking into a ballroom. She was walking into her future. The ballroom shimmered, with golden chandeliers casting soft light across polished marble. White roses lined the room, filling the air with their scent, delicate but insistent, like they belonged there. The air was thick with the perfume of wealth, of old names, of people who had always assumed the world bent toward them. Nova entered with her head held high. Conversations dipped for a heartbeat, just long enough to notice her presence. Before resuming in their glossy, practiced tones, she spotted the cluster she had avoided for years. Marcus's parents, Victoria, and their circle of friends. They stood in a tight huddle, their laughter too loud, their smiles too sharp. Once, their presence would have made her shrink. Not tonight. Nova walked past them with ease, her eyes never faltering from the path ahead. At the far end, the stage waited. She climbed the steps, the hush falling over the room as she reached the podium. A single spotlight cut across the space, wrapping her in its glow. For the first time, in a long time, she felt not exposed, but at home, exactly where she was supposed to be. Thank you all for being here tonight. She began. Her voice was clear, resonant, and unwavering. This isn't just another gala. This isn't another empty promise dressed in glitter. Tonight, we are building something that will last, a place where women like us can thrive, create, and lead. We're not asking for seats at the table anymore. We're building our own. The room stilled. No one shifted. She had expected nerves to betray her, for doubt to whisper its familiar tune. Instead, what coursed through her was power. It radiated from her chest, steady and undeniable. I didn't come here to beg. Nova continued, her voice cutting clean through the silence. I didn't come here to ask for approval. I came here to claim what is ours, what has always been ours. Tonight is only the beginning. For a heartbeat, silence held, and then applause erupted. Not measured or polite, but raw, carrying the kind of truth people don't fake. It rose like a wave and washed over her. In that sound, Nova felt the truth crystallize. She wasn't just raising money or launching a project. She was igniting a movement. As she stepped down from the stage, her heart still thrumming, she caught sight of him, Marcus. He stood near the back, his eyes locked on her. Gone was the confusion, the hesitation, the judgment that had once clouded his gaze What remained was something simpler: respect, admiration. For a fleeting moment, the past flickered their broken marriage, the expectations that had crushed them both. And then she understood. She had built something larger than all of it, larger than him, larger than the family that had dismissed her. She had built herself, and she had built something that would last beyond either of them. Marcus moved closer. His voice was quiet, stripped of armor. "I was wrong," he said. "I've been wrong about everything." Nova met his eyes, but she didn't need to answer. She didn't need his validation. That part of her life had closed. She had her own voice now, and it was more than enough. With a calm, almost gentle smile, she turned away. Her heels echoed against the marble floor as she walked past him, past the ghosts of her past, toward the doors that opened into night, into a future she had carved herself, a future that was limitless. The weeks after the gala unfolded like a tide, sweeping Nova forward into a life that felt both familiar and completely new. But unlike before, the pace didn't drain her. The endless calls, meetings, and media appearances were no longer a blur of obligation. They carried intention now. Each day felt aligned with something greater than herself. The foundation thrived. The numbers were proof. But what mattered most was the people. Women who had been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced were stepping forward with a fire in their eyes. Some came with trembling voices, others with bold declarations, but all of them carried the same conviction. They were done being invisible. Nova felt it too. What began as her dream was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told to stay quiet. Every young girl who had been taught to shrink. Still, deep inside, that a different storm began to stir. Not of fear or doubt, but of responsibility. She understood that power wasn't just about arrival. It was about what you did once you stood in the spotlight. And she knew the work had only begun. One evening, as the sun sank and the city below turned into a sea of lights, Nova sat in her office. The glow of her laptop was the only light around her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved with certainty. She was drafting an article she would submit to a national publication, an open letter to women everywhere. Her words poured out, unguarded and fierce. She wrote of reclaiming space in a world that had tried to erase her, of refusing to apologize for ambition or success. She wrote of the walls built around her, and around women like her, and of tearing them down brick by brick. It wasn't just an article, it was a manifesto, a refusal to stay silent any longer. When she finished, Nova leaned back in her chair. The words stared back at her, pulsing with truth. For the first time in years, she didn't question whether her voice mattered. She knew it did. Her gaze drifted to the window, out across the city. Inevitably, her thoughts slipped toward Marcus. Their final conversation at the gala had been a release. She no longer craved his approval or carried his doubts inside her. Still, a faint ache lingered, not for him, but for the life that might have been, had things been different. It was an ache she could live with now. The door creaked open. Lena stepped in, draping her coat over the back of a chair. Her presence, as always, brought calm. She studied Nova for a moment before smiling. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world again," Lena said softly. "Think you could set it down long enough to share a glass of wine with me?" Nova chuckled, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I think I've earned that." Lena poured 2 glasses of red wine. They settled into the quiet together, the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. Then Lena raised her glass, eyes gleaming. "To the women who've had enough," she said. Nova lifted her own glass, meeting Lena's with a soft clink, her voice caught with emotion. "To us, to all of us." The words lingered like a vow. They drank, not in celebration, but in solidarity. For that moment, The world's weight lifted. Nova allowed herself to breathe, to feel the peace that had always seemed out of reach. Of course, battles lay ahead, many of them, but for the first time, she believed she could face them all and win. Winning didn't mean perfection. It didn't mean pleasing everyone. It meant living unapologetically as herself. In the months that followed, Nova's reach expanded. She traveled across the country, standing on stages that once would have terrified her. She delivered keynotes, her voice steady as she spoke of power, resilience, and inclusion. She mentored young women who reminded her of herself, brilliant but underestimated, eager but doubted. She told them what she had once needed to hear. You are enough. You don't have to wait for permission. Build your own space. The world began to take notice. Headlines celebrated her. Interviews amplified her vision. Yet, what mattered more than recognition was the quiet shift within. She felt peace in knowing she was shaping her life on her terms, not anyone else's. She no longer waited for doors to open. She carved her own, and in doing so, she created openings for others. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about legacy. A legacy of change, not applause. A legacy that meant future generations of women would never feel as invisible as she once had. She had become a symbol not perfect, not untouchable, but undeniable. A reminder of what was possible when you refused to shrink. Nova Ellis had claimed her place, and in doing so, she had ignited something larger than herself, something that would outlast her name. The applause would fade, the headlines would dim, but the movement she had sparked would carry on. The future stretched wide before her. This time, she didn't step forward with hesitation. She walked toward it with clarity, with strength, with peace. Because the battle she had once thought impossible, the battle to be wholly herself, was already won.